What happened in a Miami federal courthouse last Tuesday will go down as one of the most shocking courtroom moments in legal history. When Judge Robert Harrison decided to mock international superstar Shakira during her high-profile tax case, he had absolutely no idea what was about to hit him. This is the story of how one of the world's biggest pop stars schooled a federal judge so hard, the entire legal community is still talking about it. The morning started like any other in the federal courthouse of the Southern District of Florida. Located in the heart of downtown Miami, this imposing building has seen its share of high-profile cases. Drug kingpins, political corruption, white-collar crime, the marble halls have echoed with the footsteps of some of America's most notorious defendants. But nothing could have prepared the staff for what was about to unfold in Courtroom 8A. It was Tuesday, March 15, 2025, and the media circus was already in full swing. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic flowers seeking the sun. Reporters clutched their microphones, practicing their opening lines for what they assumed would be a routine celebrity tax case. Shakira faces federal charges, they rehearsed. Pop star could face prison time. None of them had any idea they were about to witness legal history. Inside the courthouse, security was tight. Federal marshals flanked every entrance, their eyes scanning the growing crowd of onlookers, legal professionals and curious members of the public who had managed to snag one of the limited seats in the gallery. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, but also tinged with that particular brand of skepticism that accompanies celebrity legal troubles. Everyone assumed they knew how this would play out, another entitled star getting their comeuppance in the American justice system. Judge Robert Harrison had been on the federal bench for 23 years. At 62, he was a Reagan appointee with a reputation for running a tight courtroom. Harrison was old-school starched collars, perfectly knotted ties, and an unwavering belief that respect for the law was paramount. He had presided over some of the district's most significant cases, including the prosecution of several high-ranking members of a Miami-based international money laundering ring. But Harrison had a weakness, one that would prove to be his undoing on this particular Tuesday morning. He had an ego the size of the courthouse itself and a particular disdain for what he considered the intellectual lightweights of the entertainment industry. Court insiders knew Harrison's reputation well. He loved to demonstrate his superior intellect, especially when dealing with celebrities who found themselves in his courtroom. Harrison had made headlines before for his sharp tongue. 3 years earlier, during a case involving a reality TV star charged with tax evasion, he had famously quipped, "Perhaps if you spend as much time reading tax codes as you do reading your own press clippings, we wouldn't be here today." The comment had gone viral, cementing Harrison's reputation as the judge who didn't suffer fools gladly. As 9 a.m. approached, the principals began taking their places. The prosecution team, led by Assistant United States Attorney Sarah Mitchell, sat at their table reviewing their notes one final time. Mitchell was known for her meticulous preparation and her perfect record in high-profile tax cases. She was confident this would be another straightforward victory. After all, how hard could it be to prosecute a pop star for tax evasion? At the defense table, a different scene was unfolding. Shakira's legal team, headed by renowned white-collar defense attorney Marcus Chin, seemed unusually relaxed for lawyers defending a client facing potentially decades in federal prison. Chin, a Harvard Law graduate with an impeccable track record defending international tax cases, kept checking his watch and glancing toward the courtroom doors with what could only be described as anticipation. Then, at exactly 8:58 a.m., Shakira entered the courtroom. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. The low murmur of conversation that had filled the gallery fell to absolute silence. Every head turned toward the defendant's entrance. But this wasn't the Shakira the world knew from music videos and concert stages. Gone were the flowing hair, the sparkling costumes, the magnetic stage presence that had captivated millions around the globe. Instead, walking through those courtroom doors was a woman who looked every inch the serious legal professional. Shakira wore a perfectly tailored navy blue business suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confident stride of someone completely at ease in formal legal proceedings. Her transformation was so complete that several spectators actually looked around, wondering if this was really the same person whose hips had become globally famous for not lying. Judge Harrison watched her entrance with barely concealed amusement. He had clearly expected the glamorous pop star, not this polished professional version. But rather than giving him pause, Shakira's serious appearance seemed to amuse him even more. Here was a celebrity trying to play dress up as a serious person, he thought. How quaint. As Shakira took her seat at the defense table, she exchanged quiet words with her attorney. Chin nodded and pulled out a thick manila folder from his briefcase. Whatever was in that folder seemed to give both of them considerable confidence. "All rise," called the bailiff, and the courtroom shuffled to its feet as Judge Harrison took the bench. He surveyed the packed courtroom with satisfaction. High-profile cases always brought out the crowds, and Harrison enjoyed being the center of such attention. "Be seated," Harrison commanded, settling into his chair with the satisfied air of a man about to preside over what he assumed would be an easy victory for the prosecution. "We are here today for the case of United States v. Shakira Isabel Mebarak Ripoll, case number 25-1147. The defendant stands charged with federal tax evasion in connection with income earned between 2018 and 2022. The charges were serious, willful failure to pay taxes on income exceeding $50 million. If convicted, Shakira faced up to 5 years in federal prison for each count, plus millions in fines and penalties. The prosecution alleged that she had established residency in the Bahamas to avoid Spanish taxes while actually living in Barcelona, creating a complex web of international tax obligations that she had allegedly ignored. Assistant United States Attorney Mitchell rose to deliver her opening statement. She was polished, professional, and utterly confident. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is about accountability. The defendant, despite earning hundreds of millions of dollars from her international music career, allegedly chose to evade her tax obligations through an elaborate scheme involving multiple jurisdictions and shell corporations." Mitchell outlined the prosecution's case with military precision. She described Shakira's residency claims in the Bahamas, her actual time spent in Spain, and the complex financial structures that had allegedly been used to minimize tax obligations. It was a compelling narrative, backed by what appeared to be overwhelming documentary evidence. "The defendant may be talented at writing catchy songs," Mitchell continued, "but talent in entertainment does not excuse willful violation of federal tax law. The evidence will show that the defendant engaged in a deliberate scheme to evade taxes, and she must be held accountable like any other citizen." As Mitchell spoke, Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of case he relished: clear facts, obvious guilt, and a defendant who had clearly thought their celebrity status would protect them from consequences. He glanced over at Shakira, expecting to see the typical deer-in-headlights expression of a celebrity facing serious criminal charges. Instead, he was surprised to see Shakira taking detailed notes, her pen moving quickly across a legal pad. She seemed to be documenting every point of the prosecution's argument with the focused attention of a lawyer. But that was impossible, Harrison thought. This was a pop star, not a legal professional. When Mitchell finished her opening statement, Judge Harrison turned to the defense table. "Mr. Chin, does the defense wish to make an opening statement?" Chin stood slowly, that same confident smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, Your Honor. But first, I wonder if the court would indulge me in a brief procedural matter." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Procedural matters were usually handled before opening statements, but he nodded. "Proceed, Counselor." "Your Honor, my client has expressed a desire to represent herself in these proceedings, with me serving in an advisory capacity only." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Pro se representation, defending oneself without an attorney, was almost unheard of in complex federal cases. It was legal but widely considered professional suicide. Harrison's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "Mr. Chin," Harrison said slowly, "I'm sure you've advised your client that self-representation in a federal criminal case is inadvisable, particularly in a case involving complex international tax law." Chin nodded. "I have indeed provided that advice, Your Honor. However, my client is quite insistent. She believes she is uniquely qualified to handle her own defense." Harrison looked directly at Shakira for the first time. Shakira, is it? Do you understand that you have the right to competent legal representation? And that representing yourself in a federal criminal case is extremely risky?" Shakira stood gracefully, her posture perfect, her voice clear and confident. "I do understand, Your Honor. And I appreciate the court's concern. But I believe I am quite capable of representing my own interests in this matter." Harrison couldn't help himself. A condescending smile spread across his face. "Shakira, I'm sure you're very talented at whatever it is you do. But federal criminal law is not a popularity contest or a talent show. This is serious business requiring serious legal knowledge." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several members of the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Harrison's tone had been unmistakably dismissive, bordering on insulting. Shakira's response was measured and professional. Your Honor, I understand your concerns and I share your commitment to the serious nature of these proceedings. I believe my qualifications will become apparent as we proceed. Harrison's smile widened. Your qualifications? Shakira, with all due respect, what qualifications could you possibly have to represent yourself in a complex federal tax case? You're a singer, not a lawyer. This was the moment that would change everything. Shakira reached into her briefcase and withdrew a document. She walked to the bench with the confident stride of someone who belonged there and handed the document to the court clerk, who passed it up to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, Shakira said, her voice carrying a new authority, I believe this document addresses your question about my qualifications. Harrison looked down at the document in his hands. As he read, his expression began to change. The condescending smile faded first, replaced by confusion. Then confusion gave way to surprise. And finally, surprise morphed into something approaching shock. The document was a diploma from Universidad Externado de Colombia, one of Latin America's most prestigious law schools. But this wasn't just any diploma, it was a Juris Doctor degree awarded summa cum laude to Shakira Isabel Mebarak Rapal, with a specialization in international tax law. The courtroom was silent as Harrison read and reread the document. The date on the diploma showed that Shakira had completed her law degree during a supposed break from her music career in 2019, a break that everyone had assumed was just another celebrity hiatus. But there was more. Clipped to the diploma was a certificate showing that Shakira had passed the Colombian bar exam with the highest score recorded in the past decade. And behind that, a letter from the Dean of Universidad Externado describing Shakira's doctoral thesis on jurisdictional conflicts in international tax law, a comparative analysis of European and Latin American frameworks. Harrison's face had gone completely white. The proud, condescending judge who had been ready to lecture a pop star about legal complexity was now staring at credentials that were more impressive than those of many of the attorneys who appeared in his courtroom. But Shakira wasn't finished. Your Honor, she continued, I should also mention that during my time at Universidad Externado, I had the privilege of studying under Professor Carmen Rodriguez, who literally wrote the textbook on international tax compliance that was cited in the Supreme Court's decision in Bolivar Corp v. Commissioner. The name Carmen Rodriguez sent a visible shock through the prosecution team. Rodriguez was a legend in international tax law, her work cited by courts around the world. For Shakira to have studied under her personally was like a medical student claiming to have studied under Jonas Salk. Assistant U.S. Attorney Mitchell was frantically whispering to her colleague, but Shakira continued speaking. Additionally, Your Honor, while building my music career, I've been working as a consultant for several international tax firms. I've helped multinational corporations navigate the exact regulatory frameworks that are at issue in this case. She reached into her briefcase again and produced another folder. These are letters of recommendation from senior partners at Baker McKenzie, Clifford Chance, and Sullivan Cromwell, all attesting to my expertise in international tax law. The names she was dropping were the Mount Rushmore of international law firms. These weren't casual endorsements, these were the most prestigious legal institutions in the world vouching for her expertise. Judge Harrison was speechless. In 23 years on the bench, he had never encountered anything like this. The pop star he had been ready to mock and humiliate was revealing herself to be more qualified in international tax law than most of the attorneys who practiced before him. Furthermore, Shakira continued, her confidence growing with each revelation, I've published 3 peer-reviewed articles in the International Tax Review, including one that was specifically cited by the European Court of Justice in their decision in the Santander AG case last year. Mitchell was now frantically typing on her laptop, clearly trying to verify these claims in real time. Her confidence was evaporating with each new revelation. Your Honor, Shakira said, I've also been consulted by the Colombian government on tax policy reform, specifically regarding the treatment of international artists and athletes. The framework I helped develop has since been adopted by 12 other Latin American countries. The courtroom was in complete shock. This wasn't just a celebrity with a law degree, this was a genuine expert in the exact area of law that was central to her case. Judge Harrison finally found his voice. Mebarak Rapal, he said, using her legal name with new respect. These credentials are impressive. But I have to ask, why didn't you lead with this information? Shakira's smile was slight but meaningful. Your Honor, I believe it's always better to let actions speak louder than credentials. I was prepared to demonstrate my legal knowledge through my defense rather than simply asserting it. Harrison realized he had walked straight into a trap of his own making. His assumptions and prejudices had led him to humiliate himself in front of a packed courtroom. The video cameras that were recording the proceedings had captured every moment of his condescending treatment of someone who was, it turned out, far more qualified than he had given her credit for. Your Honor, Shakira continued, if the court is satisfied with my qualifications, I'd like to address some fundamental problems with the prosecution's case. Harrison nodded weakly. Proceed, counselor. Mebarak Repal. What happened next was unlike anything the Miami federal courthouse had ever seen. Shakira proceeded to dismantle the prosecution's case with surgical precision, demonstrating a mastery of international tax law that left everyone in the courtroom absolutely stunned. Your Honor, she began, the prosecution's entire case rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of the Treaty for the Avoidance of Double Taxation between Spain and the Bahamas, specifically Article 4, which deals with fiscal residency determination. She moved to a presentation easel that had been set up for the prosecution's use. May I, Your Honor? Harrison, still reeling from her revelations, nodded. Shakira began drawing a complex diagram showing the relationship between various international tax treaties. The prosecution argues that my physical presence in Spain created an automatic tax obligation. However, they fail to consider the application of the OECD Model Tax Convention, specifically the tiebreaker rules in Article 4, Paragraph 2. She was speaking with the fluency of someone who had spent years studying these exact issues. Under the OECD framework, which both Spain and the Bahamas have adopted, fiscal residency is determined not merely by physical presence, but by the center of vital interest test. Mitchell was furiously taking notes, trying to follow Shakira's argument. It was clear that she was struggling to keep up with the legal complexity. Furthermore, Shakira continued, the prosecution has ignored the Barcelona Convention of 2019, which specifically addresses the tax treatment of international artists. Article 12 of that convention clearly states that residency for tax purposes must be determined by the location of the taxpayer's permanent establishment, not temporary presence. She turned to address the prosecution directly. Mitchell, in your opening statement, you cited the case of Martinez v. Spanish Tax Authority as precedent for your residency argument. However, that case was decided before the Barcelona Convention took effect, and more importantly, it dealt with a businessman, not an international artist subject to the special provisions of the convention. The color was draining from Mitchell's face. She was realizing that her supposedly airtight case had been built on outdated legal foundations. Shakira wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to the concept of economic substance, as defined in the U.S. Bahamas Tax Information Exchange Agreement of 2020. The prosecution alleges that my Bahamian residency was a sham, created solely for tax purposes. However, they failed to provide any evidence that my Bahamian residence lacks economic substance. She reached into her briefcase and produced yet another set of documents. These are property records showing that I purchased a $47 million estate in Nassau in 2017, which has served as my primary residence ever since. These are employment records showing that I employ a full-time staff of 12 people in the Bahamas. These are business registration documents showing that 3 of my companies are incorporated in the Bahamas and conduct substantial business activities there. Judge Harrison was reviewing the documents with growing amazement. This wasn't just a legal argument, it was a masterfully prepared case that demolished the prosecution's theory of the case. But more importantly, Your Honor, Shakira continued, the prosecution has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my work. They seem to believe that because I performed concerts in Spain, I was working in Spain for tax purposes. However, under international tax law, particularly the provisions of the multilateral instrument that modified existing tax treaties, the tax treatment of entertainers is governed by special rules. She walked over to a law book that was sitting on the court reporter's desk and opened it to a marked page. Article 17 of the OECD Model Tax Convention, which governs the taxation of entertainers and sportspersons, specifically provides that income from performances may be taxed in the country where the performance takes place, but this does not create residency for the performer. The distinction was crucial, and everyone in the courtroom could see that Mitchell hadn't anticipated this argument. In other words, Shakira explained, the fact that I performed concerts in Spain may create a Spanish tax obligation for the income from those specific performances, but it does not and cannot create Spanish residency for my worldwide income. She paused to let this sink in. The prosecution's entire case is based on the flawed premise that my presence in Spain for performances created Spanish tax residency. Under international tax law, this is simply incorrect. Judge Harrison was scribbling notes frantically. In all his years on the bench, he had never seen such a sophisticated legal argument presented by a pro-se defendant. But Shakira had saved the best for last. Your Honor, there's one more issue I'd like to address. The prosecution has alleged that I engaged in a scheme to evade taxes. However, they've presented no evidence of intent to evade. In fact, the evidence shows the opposite. She produced another document. This is a letter from my tax advisors to the Spanish tax authorities, dated January 15, 2018, formally requesting guidance on my tax obligations as an international artist with residency in the Bahamas. The Spanish authorities never responded to this request. The courtroom was dead silent. This was a bombshell that no one had seen coming. This is a second letter, dated June 3, 2018, again requesting clarification on my tax status. Again, no response from the Spanish authorities. Shakira's voice grew stronger. Your Honor, these letters prove that far from trying to evade taxes, I was actively seeking guidance from the Spanish tax authorities to ensure compliance with all applicable laws. The failure to respond to these requests cannot now be used as evidence of evasion on my part. Assistant U.S. Attorney Mitchell looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Her supposedly slam-dunk case was crumbling before her eyes. Furthermore, Shakira continued, I have documentation showing that I filed protective tax returns in Spain for the years in question, pending clarification of my tax status. These returns were filed precisely to avoid any suggestion of evasion. She handed the protective returns to the court clerk. Your Honor, these documents demonstrate that not only did I not evade taxes, but I took extraordinary measures to ensure compliance with potentially applicable tax laws, even when those laws were unclear. Judge Harrison was reviewing the protective returns with obvious amazement. Protective returns were an advanced tax strategy used by sophisticated taxpayers to preserve their rights while seeking clarification of complex legal issues. The fact that Shakira had filed them demonstrated a level of tax sophistication that went far beyond what anyone had expected. Your Honor, Shakira said, based on these facts, I move for dismissal of all charges. The prosecution has failed to prove that I had any tax obligation in Spain, failed to prove any intent to evade taxes, and failed to address the extensive evidence showing my good faith efforts to comply with all applicable tax laws. The motion for dismissal hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Judge Harrison looked from Shakira to the prosecution team and back again. In 30 years of legal experience, he had never seen such a complete reversal of fortune in a courtroom. Assistant U.S. Attorney Mitchell slowly rose to her feet. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a brief recess to review these new developments. Harrison nodded. Court will recess for 30 minutes. As the courtroom emptied, the buzz of conversation was deafening. Reporters were frantically calling their editors. Legal analysts were trying to process what they had just witnessed. And Judge Harrison sat alone at the bench, staring at the pile of documents that had just demolished what everyone had assumed was an open-and-shut case. When court reconvened, Mitchell's demeanor had changed completely. The confident prosecutor who had delivered the opening statement was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they'd just been hit by a legal freight train. Your Honor, Mitchell said quietly, after reviewing the defense's arguments and supporting documentation, the United States respectfully moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant. The courtroom erupted. Spectators gasped, reporters shouted questions, and cameras flashed as everyone tried to capture the moment. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Motion granted, Harrison said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. All charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed with prejudice. But the story wasn't over yet. As the courtroom began to empty, Judge Harrison called out, Mebarak Ripoll, could I see you in chambers for a moment? 5 minutes later, in the privacy of his chambers, Judge Harrison faced Shakira across his desk. The arrogant judge who had mocked her just hours earlier was gone, replaced by a humbled man who clearly understood the magnitude of his mistake. Mebarak Ripoll, Harrison began, I owe you an apology. My behavior in court today was inappropriate and unprofessional. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on your profession, and I was wrong. Shakira nodded graciously. Your Honor, I appreciate your apology. We all make assumptions sometimes. Harrison shook his head. No, it was more than that. I was condescending and dismissive, and you had every right to be offended. Your legal arguments today were exceptional, better than many I've heard from seasoned attorneys." He paused, struggling with his next words. "I've been on this bench for over 20 years, and I've never been more thoroughly outlawyered than I was today. You didn't just win your case, you gave everyone in that courtroom a master class in international tax law." Shakira smiled. "Your Honor, the law is a powerful tool for justice, but only when it's applied fairly and without prejudice. Today was a reminder of that for all of us." Harrison nodded. "Indeed it was. And if I may ask, what will you do now? Have you considered practicing law full-time?" Shakira laughed. "Your Honor, I have the best of both worlds. Music allows me to touch people's hearts, and law allows me to fight for justice. I don't see why I can't continue doing both." As news of the day's events spread, the legal community was buzzing. Harvard Law School invited Shakira to give a guest lecture on international tax policy. The Colombian government offered her a position as a special advisor on tax reform. And legal blogs around the world were calling it one of the most impressive displays of courtroom advocacy in recent memory. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Judge Harrison himself. The experience had fundamentally changed him. He issued a public statement acknowledging his inappropriate behavior and announcing that he would be attending judicial training on unconscious bias and professional conduct. The video of the hearing went viral within hours. Clips of Shakira's legal arguments were shared millions of times across social media platforms. The hashtag #ShakiraScoopsJudge trended worldwide for 3 days. Legal experts were calling it a watershed moment in the fight against professional prejudice. But for Shakira, the real victory wasn't in winning the case. It was in the message it sent to the world. In an age where people are quick to judge others based on their appearance, profession, or background, she had delivered a powerful reminder that intelligence comes in many forms, often hidden behind the personas we think we know. 3 months later, Judge Harrison announced his retirement from the bench. In his farewell address, he spoke about the importance of approaching every case and every person with an open mind. "I learned more about the law and about myself in one morning with Shakira Rapal than I had in 20 years on the bench," he said. As for Shakira, she returned to her dual career with renewed purpose. Her next album, Legal Mind, included a song called "Never Judge" that became an anthem for anyone who had ever been underestimated because of who they were or what they did for a living. The case of United States v. Shakira Isabel Mebarak Rapal became required reading in law schools around the world, not because of its legal precedents, but because of what it taught about the dangers of prejudice and the power of preparation. And somewhere in a federal courthouse in Miami, there's a plaque that wasn't there before. It reads, "Justice is blind, but judges should keep their eyes open." It's a reminder that in the pursuit of justice, assumptions can be the enemy of truth, and wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources. The day Shakira schooled a federal judge became more than just a legal victory. It became a lesson for everyone about the importance of never underestimating others and always being prepared to learn something new. Because sometimes, the person you think you know everything about might just be the smartest one in the room.